Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. The book we are interpreting for you in this issue is a Canadian literary masterpiece called The Handmaid's Tale. Published in the United States in 1987, the novel stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for 23 weeks. Since its inception, The Handmaid's Tale has been translated into over 40 languages and adapted into various forms, including movies, plays, operas, and even ballet. As a representative work of female dystopian literature, it has evolved into a commonly used phrase in English to signify a society that oppresses women, especially in forcibly controlling women's reproductive freedom. The world of the handmaids is a slightly twisted version of the real world, where women living in it lose control over their bodies and reproductive rights, a situation more chilling for the audience than a future where artificial intelligence rules over humanity. Before delving into the novel, let's talk about the author of this book, the Queen of Canadian Literature, Margaret Atwood. Prior to Alice Munro winning the Nobel Prize in Literature, Atwood's name seemed synonymous with Canadian literature. Born in Ottawa, Canada, she was the only one in her family not engaged in a scientific profession. Her father was an entomologist, her mother a nutritionist, and her brother a neurophysiologist. Until she entered elementary school, the family spent most of their time in the isolated wilderness of northern Canada at an insect observation station. Therefore, terms like wilderness, ecology, and technology became recurring themes in her later writing. After completing her master's degree, Atwood received a scholarship from Harvard University, but she dedicated most of her time to writing. In the social environment of the 1950s and 1960s, the prospect for Canadian women to become professional writers was not optimistic. Even Canadian literature itself was in a state of undiscovery, with literature department curricula in universities primarily focusing on English and American literature. Pursuing a PhD became her temporary means of livelihood. In 1966, Atwood officially entered the literary world as a poet. In 1969, she published her first novel, The Edible Woman, using the metaphor of consumption to symbolize the invisible pressures faced by women in professional and marital life, as well as power differentials between the sexes. Subsequently, she was shortlisted for the Booker Prize 3 times, finally winning the award in 2000 with The Blind Assassin. Interestingly, Atwood's rise in the literary world coincided with the process of Canadian literature becoming an academic research category, and she even helped establish the direction of research in Canadian literature. In 1972, she proposed in a work titled Survival, a thematic guide to Canadian literature, that the essence of Canadian literature is survival, emphasizing that those who tell the story are people who have survived terrifying experiences, be it the northern wilderness, snowstorms, shipwrecks, or those who couldn't tell their stories and did not survive. In the early 1980s, conservative forces in the United States advocated for traditional family values and moral guidelines, leading to a return to power. Feminists became one of the least welcomed groups by those in power. During this time, Atwood visited several Iron Curtain countries in Eastern Europe, experiencing a sense of caution and surveillance. Simultaneously, her experiences growing up in the post-World War II era made her aware that established orders could disappear overnight, and the assertion that such things cannot happen here is unreliable. Therefore, in The Handmaid's Tale, she made a bold assumption: a coup occurred in the United States, and the former democratic regime transformed into a theocratic dictatorship called the Republic of Gilead. The Constitution and Congress no longer exist, and the Bible became the sole code of conduct. To cope with the drastic population decline due to ecological deterioration, Gilead established a system called handmaids, which forms the major premise of the story we are about to hear. Genre-wise, the novel continues the familiar Western tradition of dystopian literature, assuming the premise of if things continue like this, we will all be doomed. At the same time, it blends elements of science fiction, though Atwood prefers to categorize her work as speculative fiction. This literary category was proposed by the father of modern American science fiction, Robert Heinlein, gradually evolving into a category spanning science fiction, fantasy, and even horror novels. Atwood believes it is a form of science fiction where everything described in it could really happen. Since high school, Atwood had extensively read many similar works, most of which were written by male authors with male protagonists. As an ambitious writer, she naturally wanted to subvert this tradition by choosing a female perspective to tell a similar story. Her writing creed is that every detail in the book can find a real counterpart in history. Therefore, in this novel, we will encounter collective executions, high-pressure surveillance, book burnings, the history of Romania establishing fertility police, the history of slavery, and the history of polygamy in the United States. We may recognize some of these scenes, familiar enough to make us uneasy, as the fate of the characters in the book seems to await each one of us just around the next corner. Now, let's delve into the main theme. The story takes place in the Republic of Gilead at the beginning of the 21st century. In order to address the population crisis, all women capable of reproduction are gathered and allocated as state-owned resources to fulfill the reproductive tasks that wives cannot accomplish, known as handmaids. The seemingly absurd system is based on a passage from the book of Genesis in the Bible. When Jacob's wife Rachel couldn't conceive, she allowed her handmaid Bilhah to sleep with Jacob and bear several children. However, handmaids cannot have their own descendants, and they don't even have names. Each time they rotate to a new household, their designation changes, with the only constant being the prefix of, signifying a subordinate relationship. As our protagonist is assigned to the household of the powerful Commander Fred, she is called Offred. This name also resembles Offred, hinting at a sacrificial meaning. The composition of the commander's household represents the typical structure of Gilead. Each woman is categorized and assigned a specific role, undertaking various functions such as the wife managing the household, the Martha responsible for household chores, the maid, and the handmaid dedicated to reproduction. Depending on their identity and position, the color of their clothing varies. Wives wear blue, Marthas wear dark green, and handmaids wear red, symbolizing childbirth. Additionally, there is a male chauffeur, Nick, who, due to his low status, lacks the right to marry or have his own handmaid. The spatial configuration of the household is strictly divided. The living room and garden belong to the wife, the office is the commander's private space, the kitchen is for the Martha, the handmaid has her own small room, and the chauffeur stays in the garage. Everyone has their place, and each position is occupied by an individual, forming a hierarchical system with practical functions that extends to the entire country. To emphasize the sanctity and rationality of the ruling regime, Gilead's daily life consists of various rituals. Among them, the most absurd is the ceremony, essentially rationalizing the commander's sexual assault on the handmaid. The entire ritual resembles a standardized assembly line operation, with the handmaid lying between the wife's legs. Except for the required reproductive parts, physical contact between the handmaid and the commander is strictly forbidden, and anything related to sex and warmth is rigorously rejected. To eliminate any potential physical temptations, even the handmaids themselves cannot touch their own bodies. The red handmaid attire and the white wing bonnet restrict their movements and field of vision. Besides the daily shopping, participation in prayer meetings, or other handmaids' birthing days, Offred spends most of her time confined in her room, reminiscing about the time before. As most women in Gilead are deprived of the right to read and write, the story told by Offred can only exist in her mind. The time before, as mentioned by Offred, refers to the vigorous second wave of feminism in the 1970s and 1980s. In comparison to the first wave of feminism at the end of the 19th century, the second wave shifted its focus from suffrage to other areas, making substantial efforts in sexual freedom, division of labor within families, reproductive rights, and workplace equality. Interestingly, Atwood's early writing career coincided with the emergence of the second wave, and many feminists saw her as a standard-bearer of the movement. However, Atwood maintained her distance from this wave of feminism. "I don't want to be a mouthpiece for any form of belief," she said. "I lived through that time when you couldn't wear a skirt or lipstick without being seen as a traitor to the women's cause." From the edible woman to the handmaid's tale, the social status of women in Offred's class has indeed seen a significant improvement: higher education, better job opportunities, workplace equality, and more legal protection in terms of childbirth and marriage. The consequent issue is that Offreds born in the 1970s and 1980s believe these rights are their rightful due. In the early days of Gilead's establishment, Offreds were stripped of their jobs and property, forced back into the home. Rather than rebellion, they chose to observe, as husbands urged them to consider the family's well-being. Consequently, Offred found herself busy with housework, often baking food by herself. The result? After the establishment of Gilead, as her husband had been previously married, Offred's marriage was declared illegal. She and her husband attempted to flee to Canada with their child but were intercepted by soldiers. Her husband disappeared, and the child was sent to be adopted by a commander, while Offred was sent to the Red Center for Re-Education. All women entering this center first had their history erased from records, and then they had to learn to betray other women, denouncing, humiliating, and inflicting physical harm on them, until they became accustomed to it all. Here, Atwood consciously shapes a powerful group of women, the Aunts. Most of them are older women who can wield weapons and read and write. In the patriarchal society of Gilead, where women as a whole have become a marginalized group, the Aunts are a particularly unique group, constructing another layer of matriarchal power within the paternalistic society of Gilead. Their prototypes are drawn from the history of imperialism and overseas colonization. Foreign rulers often use locals to govern local affairs. Many Aunts genuinely believe that they are helping to build a more female-friendly society. For example, Aunt Lydia, known for manufacturing memorable phrases, refers to the situation in Gilead as the new normal because normal is just the usual order of things, and no matter how absurd the world becomes, after a while, you'll get used to it, and it won't seem strange anymore. In her view, what Offred and others receive is another form of freedom. As in the anarchy of the time before, people did what they pleased, acted recklessly. Now you are free from danger, and you don't have to be afraid anymore. The reason they find it challenging to accept their situation is that they are the transitional generation, but for the next generation, it will be much easier. They will willingly accept their responsibilities because they don't want what they can't have. In the Handmaid's Tale TV series, Atwood also made a cameo appearance as an aunt, mercilessly slapping the main character for hesitating to insult a member named Jenny. Jenny was forced to repeatedly recount her experiences of rape during her youth, while other handmaids accused her, saying, "It's her fault, she seduced those men." This scene's inspiration may be traced back to a legendary figure in Atwood's own family history, Mary Webster. Mary lived in a Puritan town in Massachusetts in the 17th century, where her neighbors did not like her, accusing her of being a witch and sentencing her to be hanged. Clearly, Atwood's ancestors were victims of the widespread Salem witch trials at the time. In January 1692, in the town of Salem, 2 girls began to exhibit behaviors that seemed bewitched, and doctors speculated that they were influenced by the devil Satan. Under the combined effects of paranoia and a tense atmosphere, the girls and townspeople began accusing each other of witchcraft, with most of the accused being women. The impact of the events continued to escalate, with 19 people ultimately hanged, and over 200 people accused. Rumors spread throughout the village, plunging everyone into an abyss of suspicion and hostility. The scene in the TV series at the Red Center for Re-Education precisely confirms that witch trials still exist in today's society, now called slut-shaming, with the internet amplifying the potential for such collective behavior. Segueing from here, let's talk about another person who appears on the dedication page of the book alongside Mary, Perry Miller. He is the founder of American Puritan Studies and one of Atwood's mentors during her time at Harvard. Due to this educational experience, the author chose the setting of the novel in Massachusetts, where Harvard is located. The precursor to this prestigious institution was a Puritan theological college, and in Gilead's context, its walls become a place for the public display of corpses. Whenever Offred goes shopping, she searches for her husband's figure at this location, but what she mostly sees are doctors performing abortions, war criminals, and homosexuals. As for the university library, it becomes the headquarters of Gilead's secret police, the Eyes. The so-called Eyes are a covert police organization that monitors, surveils, and eliminates dissent in all Gilead's residents. Even the ruling class cannot escape their scrutiny. Nick, the driver of the commander, is an eye planted by them. Of course, as the saying goes, oppression breeds resistance. Ironically, resistance against Gilead begins from within the ruling class itself. Despite advocating for a simple and austere lifestyle, the wives acquire various luxuries through the black market. Despite claiming to pursue intimacy between women, the wives can hide their resentment towards the handmaids and might even use knitting needles to stab the pregnant handmaid's belly, forcing her to miscarry. As one of the founders of the system, the commander himself feels the ceremony lacks human touch. He attempts to turn the handmaid into his mistress, repeatedly asking Offred to keep it a secret from the wife and come to his office to play a banned word game, demanding her to kiss him as if for real. He gives her various small gifts, such as women's magazines from the previous century and hand cream, which have now become prohibited items. Finally, he takes her to a place similar to a nightclub, revealing that the ruling class continues to frequent such places, despite their prohibition during Gilead's early years. After spending some time in the commander's house, Offred learns from other handmaids about the existence of a resistance organization called Mayday, a term derived from French meaning help me. There is also a women's underground network that can help handmaids escape to Canada. Offred's companion, Ofglin, who accompanies her daily shopping, is a peripheral member of the organization. Upon discovering that the commander violates the rules by meeting Offred privately, Ofglin urges Offred to gather information from the commander, although they are unclear about what exactly they want to find out. To make matters worse, Offred's time is running out. If she fails to conceive a healthy child soon, she will be sent to the isolation camp to die. Surprisingly, the commander's wife is also anxious, perhaps because having a child could further secure the commander's position. Despite knowing that the commander is past the age of fertility and cannot have more children, she decides to involve the chauffeur Nick. She plays matchmaker for the two, initially intending to have Offred conceive a child but unexpectedly fostering a romantic connection between them. Some scholars interpret this tumultuous relationship as a form of resistance, suggesting that Offred is trying to regain control of her body. However, the reality is that this romance numbs her perception, making her believe her life has become bearable, even discovering a hint of sweet romance. After some time, Nick confesses to her that he is also a member of Mayday and will find a way to save her. However, Offred expresses her unwillingness to escape. Instead, she just wants to be with Nick. Gradually, she starts avoiding Ofglin's requests, eagerly hoping to become pregnant with Nick's child. Before she can confirm this news, Ofglin exposes herself during a rescue ceremony, prematurely incapacitating a fellow conspirator before he is executed by the authorities. To avoid being captured by the eyes, Ofglin chooses to take her own life. The secret meetings between Offred and the commander also come to light, leading to the commander's wife waiting in her room for the impending reckoning. At this moment, a squad of eyes storms the commander's house. Nick informs Offred that they are from Mayday, and with a mix of skepticism and resignation, she follows them out of the house. Just when we think Offred's fate is about to enter the unknown, the plot takes a bizarre turn. We find ourselves in the year 2195 at an academic conference, where scholars listen to a major discovery presented by Professor Piexoto, the 12th Symposium on Gileadian Studies. It turns out that the manuscript of The Handmaid's Tale is being discussed. As the lecture progresses, we gradually realize that everything Offred recounted earlier was edited by Professor Piexoto and his colleagues. These narratives were recorded on 30 cassette tapes, occasionally interspersed with popular songs from the 1980s to distract attention. The professors speculate that after being taken away by Mayday, Offred temporarily hid in a safe house, using the time before her escape to record her experiences, hoping that future generations would discover them. Through professional academic identification, they confirm the authenticity of these tapes, organizing and numbering the contents based on their speculations and understanding. Finally, they present this research as an academic achievement to the attendees. Their study unravels many mysteries for us, such as the creation of Gilead by a group called the Sons of Jacob think tank, of which the commander, as mentioned by Offred, was apparently a member. All these once high-ranking figures continuously fell from grace in Gilead's repeated political struggles, and the regime itself had long ceased to exist. As for Offred's fate and whether she successfully escaped Gilead after recording these tapes, or what happened to Nick, who planned her escape, these questions remain unsolved enigmas. Professor Piexoto playfully laments Offred's lack of journalistic and espionage instincts, as she failed to provide more details about the workings of the Gileadian regime or obtain any documents from the commander's private computer. As a result, their research leaves several unfillable gaps. In this way, we must admire Atwood's masterful structural design. Despite Offred's repeated warnings that her narrative is unreliable, the plot twists at the end make us question whether we ever heard the voice of a subjective female narrator. Despite being titled The Handmaid's Tale, it becomes evident that the professors are more interested in the parts of the manuscript involving Gilead's patriarchal system, considering Offred's individual experiences as inconsequential echoes of history. Additionally, judging from the speech of this male professor and the audience's reactions, making lewd jokes about women in public settings continues to prevail over 200 years later. The question of how much progress has been made from the challenges faced by Offred in the pre-Gilead era remains difficult to answer optimistically. Regarding this, Atwood herself confirmed in an article that she had arranged a successful escape for Offred. In her view, the novel contains two different futures, one with the overthrow of women's rights, but ultimately civilization is preserved in the form of oral history. If the first future becomes a reality, the second will eventually come. The novel adopts a cyclical structure, constantly revisiting the past with night as the main theme. Readers, like the protagonist, seem to be trapped in a frozen and heavy darkness. However, the narrative is so smooth and vivid, gradually outlining the interweaving and overlapping of the past and the past's past. Offred consciously shifts her narrative voice, attempting to capture the tone of characters from her memories, pretending that they are still alive. She consistently points to a future reader, preserving her individual consciousness in a world where identities and histories are erased. Yet, she often falls into self-contradiction and doubt, attempting to narrate the same memory from multiple perspectives. Thus, what we read is the intersection and confrontation of various narrative voices, creating echoes of puns, allusions, memories, retellings, and wordplay against the backdrop of this night, collectively forming the world Offred inhabits. In the context of today's mainstream literary world, the exploration of power issues using literature as a medium seems outdated. Many authors are more interested in exploring their inner worlds. However, Atwood never shies away from the idea that novels should be a way to address moral dilemmas. She believes that her novels follow the tradition of Victorian realism, where the writer's task is to make literature a mirror, reflecting potential dangers in contemporary society and arousing readers' vigilance. Although The Handmaid's Tale is a product of the 1980s, it is a work that continuously resonates with each era when women's rights are violated. During Reagan's presidency, the percentage of women in low-income professions significantly increased. Bills guaranteeing women's rights were vetoed or had their budgets reduced. Some women gained substantial income by persuading others to return to traditional homemaking roles. Katharine Hepburn became a celebrated female figure, not for her outstanding acting skills, but for her submissive image by her partner's side. The most popular talk shows openly criticized feminists, claiming that women over 30 lucky enough to find a husband were as fortunate as winning the lottery. Does all of this sound familiar? It's because The Handmaid's Tale continues to resonate in every era where women's rights are infringed upon. In Atwood's view, there is a fluid, intangible resistance in all aspects of public life, for women and everyone else, and writing is her way of expressing self-assertion. Alright, this concludes our interpretation of the book. Let's recap the key points of this discussion. Firstly, The Handmaid's Tale continues the familiar Western tradition of anti-utopian literature. However, it also blends elements of science fiction, with Atwood preferring to call her work speculative fiction. This term originally refers to a category spanning science fiction, fantasy, and even horror, but Atwood imparts it with a special meaning, considering it a form of science fiction where everything in it is possible. Secondly, the novel employs a cyclical structure, constantly revisiting the past with night as the main theme. Readers, like the protagonist, feel as though they are ensnared in a stagnant and heavy darkness. Yet the narrative is so smooth and vivid, gradually delineating the interweaving and overlapping of the past and the past past. We read a crossfire and confrontation of various narrative voices, generating echoes of puns, allusions, memories, retellings, and wordplay against the backdrop of this night, collectively forming the world the protagonist inhabits. Thirdly, Atwood never shies away from the idea that novels should be a way to address moral dilemmas. She believes that her novels follow the tradition of Victorian realism, where the writer's task is to make literature a mirror, reflecting potential dangers in contemporary society and arousing readers' vigilance. Although The Handmaid's Tale is a product of the 1980s, it is a work that continuously resonates with each era when women's rights are violated. In Atwood's view, there is a fluid, intangible resistance in all aspects of public life, for women and everyone else, and writing is her way of expressing self-assertion. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.